Hey guys, welcome back to Black Magic Craft. This week, I'm not really in the mood to build or sculpt anything original. I kind of just want to put something together and paint it. I just want to work on a miniature, but I'm not going to work on a little miniature. I'm going to put together and paint this Shipwreck Revenant. This is a big Horkin Reaper Bones mini that I got in that encounter crate from Realmsmith, and it's really inspired me. I don't want this just to live in the box of shameful unpainted miniatures.
Shame, shame, shame.
I want to bring this thing to life. It seems like it has a ton of cool details on it, and it's going to be one of those minis that I can really put a lot of work and effort into the little embellishments and the base, which is my favorite part. So that's what we're gonna do today. So I'm gonna open this thing up. I'm gonna wash it with soap and water, and I'm gonna start working on it.
Listen, I know what some of you are thinking. Sitting there going, I wish you would just build something, not assemble a pre-made mini. Well, first of all, sometimes you want to assemble and paint a mini. It's a big part of the hobby, and it's the part of the hobby I wanted to enjoy this week. More importantly though, this is not going to be a simple mini painting exercise. I'm going to try a ton of new cool techniques and products on this, both painting and in effects and embellishments. There's going to be a lot of stuff I do here that can be used in original builds. The nice thing about using someone else's sculpt is that I can go at the painting process fresh and inspired. When I do my own build, one thing that sometimes happens is that by the time I get to the painting portion, I'm burnt out and the paint job gets rushed as a result. I don't want to do that here. Now, I'm not an expert mini painter. I do things my own way, but I think the final results on this mini are quite good despite trying so many new things on it. I spent a fair amount of time deciding on whether or not I should assemble this piece before painting. In the end, I decided I'd rather just build the whole thing and deal with some of the awkward painting later as a result. This way I could fill the gaps before priming and make some of the lighting effects I wanted to do easier as one single piece, easier than it would be separately. I used a cheap super glue to assemble it and filled the gaps using the baking soda and glue method. Often on miniatures, I will prefer to use a two-part epoxy putty to fill gaps, as then I can nicely sculpt back in any missing details that run across the gaps. But the downside to putties is that they need a long time to cure before painting. I didn't want to wait for that, and since the gaps on this piece were almost all across sculpted bits of coral, the texture of the baking soda would actually be perfect. I attached the mini to a large pill bottle handle using hot glue. For a mini this heavy, poster tack is just not strong enough to hold up throughout the entire mini painting process. For primer, I went with Vallejo Surface Primer airbrushed on. This is a fast method that allows for a very thin layer of primer that bonds well with the bones material. For more info on priming bones, I will link to my video on the subject, as well as one by BLANDCO where he goes into some more detailed testing. There are a few ways you can do it, but the most important thing is to properly wash and dry the mini before priming. Using a bright white, I used the zenithal priming method. By spraying white from above at an angle, this creates an effect of a light source on the miniature by highlighting all of the highest points. This effect only really works if you later apply thin coats of color, allowing the variance of dark and light shading in the primer to show through. This also helps to bring out some of the details in the sculpt so that you can easily see them while painting and have a better idea of what you're actually painting. Now, when it comes to painting, Many skilled and experienced mini painters will spend a lot of time and effort on single parts of the model. one at a time, getting them perfect and complete before moving on to another section. I personally have a very difficult time working in this fashion and prefer to block out all of the colors across the whole mini and apply washes over several areas at a time. Because of this, I started by painting out what is the majority of color on this piece, and that's the wood. I chose a medium lightness golden brown. This color looks very much like fresh wood, but after all of the washes, it will end up looking aged. I also did a dry brushing of a bone white. Normally I avoid dry brushing on miniatures as the effect can be pretty heavy-handed looking, but the light gray chalky effect is a great way to make wood look old and weathered. I then painted out all of the metal using a gunmetal metallic. The one exception to this was a lion head carving on his crotch that I painted with a bronze, as I felt that that detail from whatever part of the ship it originated would probably have been an ornate focal point on the ship and wouldn't have been made of iron. Normally, as I said, I would wait until all the colors are blocked out before doing washes, but I was concerned that the black wash on the wood would ruin the coral if I did it after, so I decided to apply the wash before moving on to the rest of the paint. I painted out the skeleton and the ropes using a bone white, and the coral using a pure bright white. I called it a night and let things dry until the next morning. For the skeleton and the ropes, I applied a sepia brown wash. For the coral, I wanted it to have a variety of very vibrant colors, so I mixed up some bright color washes. I just chose colors that I thought would be appropriate. I made these washes by diluting the paint with Pledge floor polish instead of water, as it would help them to flow off all of the high points better and avoid any splotching while it dried. After the washes were dried, I gave the coral a very delicate dry brushing with bright white just to make sure the high points really stood out. Now it was time for the lighting effects from the lantern. I wanted the lamp to be casting a ghostly green hue on the mini, so I painted it out with a very vibrant, almost neon green, and I used my airbrush and very thinned paint to create the lighting effects. This can be done with a brush, but it takes a lot longer, and I am not nearly skilled enough of a painter to achieve that effect manually with a brush. Doing it with an airbrush allowed me to spray the miniature from the direction of the light source and just naturally only hit the high points that would be in the light's path. It's a little intimidating to do this to a piece that you've just spent several hours painting, but without taking risks, you learn and achieve nothing. Now, to get this effect, I actually did 3 different colors through the airbrush. First, the main green with a very wide spread. Then I did a coat of a brighter, more yellow green on a smaller area of spray. Finally, I did a very refined spray with an almost pure yellow that was very, very thinned down. After that, I increased the effect by using a brush to manually highlight the highest and sharpest points in the path of the light source with a pure bright yellow. I blended the outer edges of this effect further onto the mini by applying a very thin wash of the base green color using a paintbrush. At this point, I had not yet painted anything on the base because I wanted to sculpt something first. I attached the mini to a wooden disc using hot glue. I then used SCULPTAMOLD to continue the base out that was already on the model onto the entire circle. This was actually the first time I used SCULPTAMOLD And I have to say, I absolutely loved it. It was very easy to mix and work with, and it dried super quick. After 30 minutes from application, you can actually move on to painting, which is awesome. When the mixture was very wet, it was easy to spread and shape, and once it had slightly hardened after about 15 minutes, I was able to go in and create hard, flat surface details and create rock shapes. SCULPTAMOLD is my new favorite thing. I wanted the Mini to look like it was standing right at the shoreline, so I painted out the base to look like a rocky shore and painted the area that I would be doing the water effect with a very deep, deep green. But before doing the water effect, I wanted the rest of the Mini to be 100% complete and varnished. So I moved on to the next cool detail, the seaweed. I wanted it to look like this thing had risen from the depths of the ocean and got seaweed stuck onto its various parts. Again, I tried something new here. I took regular cotton balls and pulled them apart. I dipped these in a green wash that I had mixed with a little bit of PVA glue, soaked up some of the excess on a paper towel, then draped them over the Mini. This worked brilliantly. So good, and I'm excited to use this effect on other pieces in the future. The addition of the base sculpt and seaweed was missing the lighting effect. And if you're wondering why I didn't do the base earlier on when I assembled everything else, it's because I thought it would be too big and just too much in the way when it came to painting. At this point, the base needed that same lighting effect, so I went back in with the airbrush and carefully applied the same effect, but I did it very lightly and carefully as I didn't want to overdo it. The last step before water effects was the varnish, and I chose a gloss varnish for this piece as I wanted it to look wet. That's something you would normally avoid with most miniatures. Since I had already been working with the airbrush so much on this piece, I decided, hey, why not try airbrushing on the gloss varnish? Another thing I was trying for the first time. It worked out really great and was a lot less of a pain in the butt in terms of ventilation than a regular aerosol spray varnish. I could finally do the water effects, which is what I'd been excitedly waiting for since assembling the Mini. For the core of the water, I used my go-to dollar store 5-minute epoxy. It's cheap, and most importantly, it's fast. I actually wanted to do this using Envirotex Light, which is a slower curing resin that's easier to pour, but I actually went to Michael's to buy some and they were sold out. So I went back home and used my faithful 5-minute stuff, which has the advantage of curing very, very quickly. Using a strip of plastic from the epoxy packaging, I created a dam to contain the resin. I held it in place with an elastic band, but also did a bead of hot glue on the underside of the base, just in case. I mixed the epoxy with a very tiny amount of green wash, and I mean a tiny, tiny amount. I wanted it to be slightly tinted to help imply depth, but I still wanted it to be translucent. Once mixed, I poured in the resin and worked it into all of the low spots. With 5-minute epoxy, you have to work quickly, and it needs some help flowing, but it gets the job done. I considered thinning it with acetone, but I wasn't sure if that would end up melting my thin plastic dam, and at this point I had taken more than enough risks on this piece and I didn't want to screw it up in the final hour. I removed the dam after only about 2 or 3 minutes, as soon as the epoxy would hold its shape. When epoxy cures, it gets incredibly hot, so hot that it can actually deform the thin plastic dam and create an odd shape. So I made sure to get it off before it reached its max temperature. The excess resin and hot glue from the dam were easily cleaned up using an X-Acto knife. To create some more depth and motion in the water, I applied a thin layer of Liquitex gloss gel to the surface. This is a great way to create waves. This can also be done with a gloss gel from Golden, the clear water effects from Vallejo, a clear acrylic caulking, or even gloss Mod Podge. However, with the Mod Podge, you can't make them as thick of a texture in one application, and you have to do it in layers. This stuff took nearly a full 24 hours to cure and go clear. While waiting, I painted out the ring of the base black. This is a really important step that some people skip, but to me, it's really the frame that borders your finished piece, so I always make sure to make it nice and clean and refined. Another thing I did while waiting was to use some of the same gloss gel to create glass on the lantern. The sculpt was recessed a bit, so I was able to fill it with gel medium, then scrape it flush with a toothpick. This worked really well, and while not an obvious detail, I think it was a nice touch. The last thing to do on this piece was to create some foamy white caps on the crests of the waves. For this I used Liquitex modeling paste, but again, you could use all sorts of things for this, like white acrylic caulking, Vallejo snow paste, or even just some white paint if you're in a pinch. I was pretty light-handed as I didn't want to overdo it, but I'll admit that after it dried, I off-camera applied a second, much heavier layer as I thought my first go was too minimal. This is by far the most fun I've ever had assembling and painting an off-the-shelf miniature. I tried all sorts of new things and, well, they all worked out pretty awesomely. A lot of these techniques will now find their way into my other projects and original builds. If you want to pick up any tools or supplies to do your own and support the channel in the process, head over to blackmagiccraft.ca, where I have my essential equipment store with Amazon affiliate links to all of the things that I use and recommend. I will also put links to some of the specific items used in this build in the video description. Making these videos every week takes an incredible amount of time and effort. Even this one, where I used an off-the-shelf miniature in the project, was still over 30 hours of work to produce. If you love these videos and you want to help me keep making them, you can do so by supporting Blackmagic Craft on Patreon. That support gives me the freedom to spend the time making videos like this, and I'd love to have you as the newest member of the Blackmagic Craft Fellowship.
There you have it, guys, another project and video complete. I hope you enjoyed this one. If you did, hit that like button and let me know in the comment section below. While I do hope you learned some specific skills from this video, what I really want you to take away is two messages. One, don't always feel like you have to build what you gotta build, be it for your YouTube channel or for your game. Some days you just might be in the mood to do a certain thing, so do that because you should enjoy the hobby. Don't build things you don't feel like building. The other thing I want you to take away from this is that you should not be afraid to experiment with techniques, materials, whatever. Lord knows I tried a ton of new things on this guy, which was risky, but hey, it's just a model. You can always repaint it. So get out there and try some crazy things. Slap some stuff on your models, spray them with lighting effects, do whatever. Anyways, guys, see you again next week. Cheers.